Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest, plus their 9% enablers, versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the Daily Blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are New Zealand Herald columnist, academic and political commentator Matthew Hooton, columnist with The Listener Simon Wilson, and business journalist with Stuff Dita DeBoni. Tonight's one-on-one in 10 is co-leader of the Māori Party Debbie Ngarewa-Packer to discuss Waitangi 26, the win against mining companies and the realities for the left with a hung parliament. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that is holding the Fourth Estate together right now. And our Twitter panel tonight, this evening, is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, the unemployment rate was released last week. It was predicted to go down, but it in fact went up. Apparently 140,000 Kiwis fleeing in 2 years damages the economy. Who would have thunk it? That didn't blunt the cheerleaders for the free market over at ZB and the National Party from trying to convince everyone that the highest unemployment level in 11 years was actually a miracle of capitalism. That's right, folks. The 600,000 Kiwis needing help from food banks monthly, the 1 in 6 young people now unemployed, the 6.4% unemployment in Auckland and 5.8% in Wellington, the 11.2% unemployment for Māori and 12.3% unemployment for Pacifica, plus the 900,000 living in poverty, plus the 400,000 on benefits, plus the 112,000 people estimated to be severely housing deprived. Apparently, these are all features of New Zealand's amazing green shoots of economic recovery, lovingly tended by the National Party, who is stamping their boot endlessly into the face of the poor. The government's honest response to 5.4% unemployment, driven directly by their policies, is literally, we don't know how lucky we are. Talking of delusion, National Party pollster and professional right-wing shit-stirrer, David Farrar, yes, that is him, dressed as Jimmy Savile, wrote an opinion piece in the Post arguing why New Zealand should bow the knee to Australia and become a colony instead of being our own country. Ironically, we are already a colony of Australia. The 4 biggest New Zealand banks are subsidiaries of Australian parent companies. Half our supermarket duopoly is owned by the bloody Australians. And there is huge Australian stakes in our insurance, financial services and infrastructure assets. The issue isn't that we should become a colony of Australia. The issue is we are already a colony of Australia and we need to break those links, not concrete them in. No Kiwi worth their soul would bow the knee to the bloody Australians. If David loves the Aussies, we're happy to fly him there. They deport 501s to us and we export barely 5'1" back to them. And finally, this week, Trump posted an AI video of himself as the king of the jungle while racistly portraying the Obamas as monkeys and apes. The White House called criticism of this unhinged social media post faux outrage and claimed it wasn't racist. Trump's White House has gone from telling you executions on the street from his private militia are actually self-defense from domestic terrorists to racist tropes not really being racist, which, when you think about it, is probably more progress than we normally hope for from Trump. We are so far from the norm now, ladies and gentlemen, that medicinal cannabis is becoming compulsory. Medicinal cannabis. It makes living under Trump and listening to ZB manageable. The political panel all stars up shortly, whānau, but first, this week's 1 on 1 in 10 with co-leader of the Māori Party, Debbie Ngarewa-Packer. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me.
Debbie, I want to start tonight with some good news because, Jesus, things are pretty grim in New Zealand right now, and it is important to celebrate the wins where we can. And we collectively had one with the decision to stop the controversial fast-track Trans-Tasman Resources seabed mining proposal, a project you have passionately fought against your entire political career. When people of conscience work together, they can prevent environmental vandalism, can't they?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a huge coup for the people, and it is absolute power to the people who had everything stacked up against them, including a absolute arrogant minister who shamelessly went out and promoted mining, who had relationships beyond what anyone in an executive position should be having. They had won and set some huge precedents in the Supreme Court. And so to have this win against a minister who not only promoted it, but actually designed the legislation to trip everyone up is an absolute, exciting win. And I think that's the thing that we've got to hang on to, is that the wins in Aotearoa aren't in Wellington. The wins are on the ground. The wins are being out there with our whānau who are turning up day after day and confronting some of this and taking it on head on. That's unity. That's unity in action.
Yeah.
I think people have gotten a little bit, fake about, what Wellington should be and what political parties and leaders should be. What they should be doing is having a wai, lining up with our people and hitting them right between the eyes. And it was just the best Waitangi day ever because we got the news the night before Waitangi.
Preach. The fact this was turned down despite Matua Shane Jones' deplorable fast-track program tells us, does it not, that we shouldn't allow cynicism of how rigged the system is to eclipse resistance. Did you ever feel like you weren't going to win in this fight?
No, because, I guess the thing is that, this is 14 years. My papa's 84 now. So, you can imagine, I think he was 70 when we started. And the rangatahi who were there holding up the banners when we first turned up, to Parliament, and those politicians, and I'll tell you, every party, bar National at the time, came lobbying us, told us if they got into government, that the first thing they'd do was ban this. They didn't, including James Shaw. And so, what we've done is had generations have this battle. The rangatahi who are with me now are now the CEOs of the iwi, are now the chairs of the hapu, and now the governance in the marae. We've got strong relationships with the coastal community, the divers, chasm, obviously. So there's just been this, if this wasn't the moment, they're here forever. Shane Jones, they're going to outlast all these politicians. And we've had, like I said, 3 different governments through this whole battle. So none of them have been good.
One of the factors that won this result was the treaty. So many Pākehā are anti the treaty without appreciating the role it plays in safeguarding our environment. Why has that fact, that the treaty is a safeguard for everyone, been so missing in our cultural narrative in this country?
I think because the actualisation, how it's executed, what it means on a day-to-day basis is often missed, because the whole narrative around the treaty has been treaty settlements. So so you've got one side here where they're accepting 1% barely for everything that was lost, and then you've got another side saying, well, that's not my generation, that wasn't me. So you can sort of see it's this moment in time. But when you get something that is actually, taking on corporate exploitation, and again, you're talking about the Australians, well, this was an Australian crowd as well. And then when you find a common ground to fight for, then all the insecurity, the looking at each other sideways drops, and you actually come together. And there are some huge extremes, people who have come to get on this kaupapa, people who would normally have voted national, people who were, very extremes. But when you have a common goal, then you can actually understand the treaty. So the EPA fast track panel have made two things in that 436-page bloody report.
Yes,
The
huge
two
report.
things were that they couldn't prove that it wouldn't be environmentally destructive. And the second thing was the role of tikanga values. The same in the president's, that was set by the Supreme Court, is the role of tikanga Māori and obviously Te Tiriti. So these are big wins for not only us in this battle, but also in the communities and any other community that has to confront this type of attack, really, because there was no one in the community that wanted it. We need employment, absolutely, but we're a district that's got a lot of experience in all the minerals. We've got more experience than any other district in the country, and we've seen what worst practicing can do and the damage to all of us, including every taxpayer. So huge win.
Let's talk about that cultural narrative in Waitangi 2026, because it seemed like a lot of brown on brown unfriendly fire this year. Labour and the Greens tried to show unity without inviting Te Pāti Māori. Uru attacked Te Pāti Māori, Kiri responded, and Penny messily resigned from Labour. The government will be thanking lucky stars and laughing all the way to the ballot box because of all the division on our side of the political fence this year. The people opposing this government want unity. Why doesn't the opposition? Things look more divided now than ever before.
Yeah, I don't get that, to be honest, on the ground. What I do get is that we had huge tikanga. There's a whole lot of anxiety and rustling around because Chippy's trying to look like he's more Māori. He's trying to look like, hey, trust me, I am going to be Tiriti-centric, but at the National Iwi Cheers Forum couldn't commit to it. He's trying to I guess follow a different narrative and almost looking like he thinks he can pull off what they did in 2017 and wipe Māori out, and then does an about face on the Radio New Zealand interview today. Look, I just think what we're seeing, and even tikanga, like it's interesting to see how Western media and the Western lens of tikanga going on the marae, and that's something that happens every day, in a normal marae setting, and huge respect that as a country we're actually talking about our tikanga. We're talking about whanaungatanga. We're talking about the tensions of turning up. We're talking about what our people want. That's unity, turning up day to day. I think if we're all looking for this glossy, polished, I don't know, stylized, influencers, pleasing unity, we're not going to get it. And if we do get that, it worries me, because then we're going to say that we're homogenizing our politics and we're not going to disrupt each other, and we're just going to let somebody be centrist. We're not going to let them be Māori Tiriti-centric. We're not going to be left, extreme. And those are things that people need to test us, and we need to put down the fake barriers and show who we are. Who are these politicians? What do they stand for? What is their tikanga going to be like? Are they authentic? When someone stands up, are they going to fight for you? And I think that's the passion. And what I like about it is that people have got opinions. They're not being fooled by politicians, by political speak and slogans and turning up with, whether it's 2 in a stand-up or 5, they don't care. And I think if I was the government, I'd be extremely concerned. One of the hardest things for Te Pāti Māori has been able to hold on to our authenticity and not completely get, the left bloc is this assumption that we're going to. Now, there's a commitment to getting this government out, but there's also a commitment to holding who we are. The tensions with that too, the imperfect perfectness of being a tangata whenua party, and we can't be assimilated while we figure that out in this realm. And I think I love the kōrero, like this huge debates and tikanga wānanga going on, and that's turning up. That's turning up, and so I would be worried if I was the government.
Māori,
because I think that we're relating very differently to how they used to. Very disciplined, very homogenized, very on mark. I don't think people fall for that anymore.
Māori unemployment hit 11.2% last week. Many are turning to Te Pāti Māori for solutions to their economic pain, and they're finding you're fighting amongst yourselves. When will we see the stability inside Te Pāti Māori that gives faith to those voters?
Oh, look, first of all, I don't think we should be saying that people get cancelled out because they're scrapping. And I don't think I've been involved in any scraps, to be honest. It's very stereotypical thing that all the Māoris are having a fight, but hey, Judith Collins left, Penny's left, and the settler parties aren't. They're all calm. So I'm not buying into that rhetoric. What I am saying is that we have turned up. Now we're electorates that have 9 to 12 MP, general MPs, and so when we talk about unemployment and what it's like here on the ground, that is about what's going on in Kinniff and Tokoroa. That is about what's going on with our politics. And I can tell you who's been tuning up to those and having those debates and having those discussions. Our solutions have to be about fighting, as you said, those 1-2%ers, the way that this government is only looking after, the super wealthy, right. Fighting for wealth tax, fighting for, incomes that are going to be living wage adjusted, making sure that our rangatahi are able to get the training and the access to adult tertiary learning as well, because that's the winner for Māori. So there's a whole lot of things in our policies and on the ground, but we can't get cut through in the media because they hate our guts. And that's okay. So, I think that, the rhetoric that when are they turning up, if you were to talk to all the polytechnics in my backyard in Te Taihawauru, they will tell you that 5 years has been to every single one.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
The reason so much focus is on Te Pāti Māori, of course, is because poll after poll after poll keeps telling us there is no left-wing government. There is no change of government without Te Pāti Māori. What would the difference be between a Labour, Green, New Zealand First government and a Labour, Green, Te Pāti Māori government?
Do you want to know the truth?
Let's hear it.
It was the Labour Green that actually didn't stop seabed mining. Right. James Shaw came to see us and promised that if he got into government, actually the Greens, it was a Labour Greens government in 2017 and 2000 that didn't stop seabed mining, that sat there and defaulted to what it is that the mainstream, party wanted. And I think that's where we belong.
Yeah.
They all have had a chance to protect Te Tiriti. And I'm not knocking our allies. I'm just stating the facts that what we had to contend with. So that is the point of difference. And we are the only treaty, tangata whenua party. Again, sure, imperfect, but there is no other. We don't have to go through a non-Māori caucus to push through a Māori line. And I think those are really important for our people right now who are really hurting. In saying that, we actually have to make sure we look after everyone that's been left behind because they have ruthlessly been bowled over by this government. I've got a family member that's gone over to Australia for the very reason that 75,000 others did.
Right.
And that hurts. Yeah. That hurts on the ground. So there's a whole lot of things that we have to worry about. And I think the extremism of us frightens people. But I'm going to tell you now, I have seen the other side where it's been too conservative. They've abandoned left-wing values and haven't really considered the wealth tax. That's a major for us. The wealth tax is a major for us. It's not about just capital gains. It's about completely disrupting this tax system, which is the reason why poverty is a political choice. And I harp on about that all the time.
That's true.
So I think that's where we are. Don't forget, we're a young party too.
Yes. Without Te Pāti Māori, it will be very difficult mathematically to generate an MMP overhang that benefits the left. If Labour and the Greens want to avoid being held hostage by New Zealand First, shouldn't they strategically be far more focused on winning general seats than beating you in the Māori electorates?
I think they've shot that. They've made their choice, and they have to wear that choice. They've given a confused messaging out to our communities.
Very confused.
And I think that's on them. I think that was a dumb move, and I think that Chippy is naive about how Māori communities work. I think that there was a deliberate intent to gain off our pain, and I get that because at the end of the day, it's about politics. But, what I think is underestimated, and I did hear Adrian on Q&A, and he's playing the Labour Party line. They'll be lucky to get one. I just think that, it's a long time in politics, 8-9 months, and we have a different noise and a really strong love and support. Absolute, disappointment that, we couldn't contain things. But, this is nowhere near as bad as when we used to see Todd, then Judith, then Simon, then I can't remember who came next, then Chris. I was there in my whole term. I saw National go through about 4 or 5 leaders, and let's go talk about Labour. I mean, and again, we've seen Greens with MPs going. This is no different, except because we're so existing and haven't just buggered off like, the people in the shoe that people want us to go. There is a real intent to continuously undermine us. Now, we've got New Zealand First with the potential of Shane Jones being the leader, who is out there, absolutely lobbying to say, oh, this is what I will do. I will give more powers to the ministers so that this mining can happen, so that our tile could be exploited, so that offshore investors can come in and then take their profits and obviously their jobs, because there's no jobs for locals in seabed mining. Right. And this is who this type of coalition would say that they'd go against. So I don't know. I think the chess players are being very naive. I see the polls, but actually they underestimate what electorates do. So it's going to be fun.
Finally, Debbie, what are your hopes in the upcoming judicial review of the Mariamino membership case? I saw that she had speaking time today in Parliament from the Māori Party. Is there some hope of reconciliation there?
Of course there is. I mean, there has always been hope. And that's not the first time we've given speaking slots to Takuta, and a couple of times, when it's been the right kaupapa for Mariamino to represent. I mean, we'll wait for the decision. We didn't go to court, so we've always, been hoping. Right. And so whatever the decision's made, we'll carry on and mahia to mahi. But I think it's really important to, again, let people have their processes. We're not the only party that's disciplined, and we probably won't be the only party that's going to be taken to court to sort things out. Sometimes, when you're trying to clear the air, you've got to go out and do it. But, hopefully we can find a way to carry on. And like I say, there have been lots of times when we've actually given speaking slots and a few other kaupapa as well. So still whānau, at the end of the day, whakapapa is always bigger than politics.
Preach. Thank you, comrade. We'll see you again soon. Kia ora.
Okay. Haki te. I have a get out of here.
Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is the union rep for Slytherin House. He makes Machiavelli look like a virgin, and he's the only New Zealand right-winger not on the taxpayers' union payroll, perpetually joining us from a secure, undisclosed location for reasons we can't disclose. New Zealand Herald columnist Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade.
G'day, how are you?
Very well. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Amused.
Good enough. Our next panellist is Auckland's most famous militant cyclist with a black belt and tree hugging. He's left the Herald and is now a columnist with the Listener. So now I don't have to subscribe to the Herald. Liberal icon Simon Wilson. Kia ora, comrade. One word.
What about Matthew Hooton?
He'll send me his column for free. One word to describe the week,
my
please.
word is flying, and unlike Matthew, I do want to explain it, because I was going to talk about politics, but I am just astonished at the ability of people to rush on little bits of wood or whatever they're made of, carbon fibre now, and go straight up as high as possible into the air and do extraordinary things that would kill all the rest of us and come down and land. And I'm talking about Zoe Sadowski-Synnott and the guys and so on.
What they do is as close to supernatural as possible, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It is as close to flying as you can get, and that is supernatural. And I think there's got to be a political metaphor in that. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's just the wonderful reverse of an end to the seabed mining. Maybe it's that. But also, Christopher Luxon went to Waitangi and he talked about, oh my gosh, no, we stand absolutely for equal opportunity, but we don't stand for any kind of sense of recognising that some people need more help than others if we're going to have any kind of genuine squaring of of the ledger, and he said the reason for that is socialism. So I think flying the political metaphor probably is socialism.
And last but
It
certainly
can be
not
done.
least, she's the greatest Gen X voice of our generation. Forget Mikey Havoc, forget Russell Brown, forget Noel McCarthy. The greatest Gen Xer was always Auckland business editor for the Post editor. Bonnie, kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the
Kia ora.
show.
Thank you, Martin.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Can I have two?
Go for it.
Minerals and mining. And I think it actually does play into what Debbie was just talking about, actually, because we've had Waitangi, no mention there really, except in a very provocative and horrible way about what, Shane Jones intends to do. But actually a lot of it comes back to ownership of the assets of the land, and we are intent seemingly on selling what's under our ground to Donald Trump's big critical minerals stockpile. And I think people haven't sort of made the connection of how terrible an idea that is.
No one has. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, New Zealand's polls predict hung parliament. How and why? Issue 2, why is Wellington drowning in shit? And issue 3 tonight, the new gas levy. And how is Matthew Hooton the only one taking climate change seriously? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on Hooton. Comrades, let's get into issue 1, and that's the poll release yesterday from the Taxpayers Union Courier poll predicting a hung parliament. Matthew, in an election this close, the MMP overhang generated most likely by either National or Te Pāti Māori could be the deciding factor, and we won't know that until the specials are in. This could be a nail-biter, couldn't it?
Most MMP elections are nail-biters. Even when John Key was re-elected, people forget just how close all those elections were. If you average out the polls, there's still a small lead by the coalition. They would get back by about 63 to 57. But as you say, the National Party's own pollster saying it's a hung parliament is going to be something that will worry them. But I think, to go back to why I'm amused about...
Because we do want to know.
Let's know. Let's find out.
What a preposterous, arrogant, ludicrous interview we just had. That is a party which has not running into a few problems. It's lost a third of its caucus. There are no other political parties that have lost a third of their caucus. They represent about 1 in 7 Maori. So 6 out of every 7 Maori do not vote for TPM. And the thing that I was amused about before listening to the interview was, remember the big, when the haka was done in Parliament, and the TPM MPs, the deputy leader even crossed the floor, broke Parliament's protocol, broke tikanga Parliament, and there was this huge fuss. Jerry Brownlee was called racist for wanting to do something about it. Well, Jerry Brownlee is no more racist than he is anorexic. But it turns out, we learned at Waitangi, that it's not just tikanga Parliament or tikanga Pākehā that TPM has no respect for. They have no respect for tikanga marae or tikanga Ngāpuhi. I know how to behave better on a marae than what we saw from the TPM activists over the weekend. As I say, they don't represent it more than a tiny, well, not a tiny, 1 in 7 Maori, but they don't respect Tau Maori. They're not a Maori party. I don't know what this nonsense is that they are the only treaty-centric party. I don't know what that means, because they don't seem to respect that. But I've worked out, I think they're the Magilla Serious Party. So I think I finally get the joke.
Horrific commentary there. Follow-up question. The plot for Winston becoming Prime Minister goes like this. He demands a coup against Chippy and makes himself Prime Minister for 18 months before handing over to Kieran McNulty, with the Greens giving supply and confidence for a few magical vegan beans, plus the clause that no Green Party MP is allowed to ever look him directly in the eye. How is that plot looking?
Well, I don't think it needs to be that sophisticated. I think that what Winston Peters is looking at is what's happening in Australia, what has happened obviously in the US over the last 9 years, and what is right now happening in the United Kingdom, with a Luxon similar type Prime Minister there, different party, but equally hopeless. And these big parties are offering, again, sound bites. They're offering, in this case, two men in identical suits, one with a blue tie, one with a red tie. And I think that Winston Peters believes that there is a possibility that there will be a development through the election that will lead to, for example, for a collapse in the support of the two main parties, as has happened in the rest of the developed English-speaking world. And he'll aim to beat them if he could.
Dita, if the Greens lose their third-party ranking to New Zealand First, Chloe and Marama will have no choice but to bend the knee and suck Winston's boot, right?
It all comes back to what you were saying before, that Te Pāti Māori has to be accommodated within a left-wing, a realistic left-wing, coalition.
Yeah.
It is only to the National Party's benefit to paint Te Pāti Māori as crazy, as we've just heard.
Of course.
That is just completely a National Party play.
Yeah.
Most left-wing people...
Except that the deputy leader just did describe herself as extreme left-wing during the interview, so it's not my words, it's hers.
Yeah, but it is the National Party's, to their benefit to make it sound like they're crazy extremists and so forth. And the media do pick up on that, actually, and they do go along with that. So there has to be accommodation in those seats, and it's very frustrating. One good thing was to see at Waitangi Labour and Greens standing together. I just about fell off my chair because they don't usually, Labour doesn't usually accommodate the Greens.
No, that's right.
So maybe if they can go that far, they can go a little bit further, because most left-wing people are not worried by Te Pāti Māori, do not feel afraid of them, and would welcome them into,
Follow-up question. If the choice is between National Act and New Zealand First for a second term of culture war revenge fantasies masquerading as social policy, or a New Zealand First Labour Green government with a few vegan baubles and positions outside cabinet thrown in for the Greens, what lesser evil will they choose?
Oh, God.
I know.
That's really tough.
Know.
That's like get on a plane to Australia.
Yeah.
Right. Seriously, because there's no accommodating Winston Peters ever.
Simon, unemployment is 5.4%, 140,000 fleeing in 2 years, collapse of public services all driven directly by this government's terrible economic policies, yet it's still a hung parliament. How bad is this for the left that these right-wing clowns are preferable despite their economic vandalism? It's us. It's on us, isn't it?
It has to be a surprise to everybody that National is still doing as well as it is in the polls, but it hasn't yet started to collapse.
No.
I'll certainly give you that. However, having said that, if you look at all the parties at the moment in Parliament, they are all fighting two elections. One of them is the left versus the right, and the other one is inside the left and inside the right, the jockeying for position.
Yes.
And that election that I mentioned second is still the predominant one, is still the one that is occupying or appears to occupy most of the parties for most of the time. We want to make ourselves as strong within the coalition that we want to be part of as we possibly can. They're all doing it, and the fact that they're all doing it means they're probably going to keep on all doing it, because to break ranks is to marginalise yourself. But at a certain point, that has to pivot. That has to pivot to becoming a left v right battle. And when that happens, we are going to see real pressure put on the two major parties to be able to stand up as the leaders of their putative coalitions.
Follow-up question. The one thing Winston wants, National and Act won't give him, but a desperate Labour might. Are you warming to Prime Minister Winston Peters for the first 18 months of a New Zealand First Labour Green government?
I absolutely am. I completely agree with Dita. I think that Winston Peters is a very malign force in New Zealand politics. I've always thought that. But I think the more that people talk about the possibility of Prime Minister Winston Peters, the more credible it sounds. It should not be talked about. It should not be sounding credible. It's
like
ludicrous
Voldemort.
idea.
You can't say his name.
Yes.
Well, yeah, you remember that Danish TV series Borgen, where the minor Green Party leader became the Prime Minister because of some fanciful idea that the TV scriptwriters dreamed up because it made good drama. In the real world, that's not really what happens. The leader of the major party will be the Prime Minister.
Although Chloe Swarbrick would be quite good.
Chloe Swarbrick, yes.
It was though. This is revisionist. I mean, it was after all Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern who made him foreign minister first to represent us on the world stage.
It's
That
different.
was under two
It's
Labour
different.
governments. And of course, when the former Prime Minister Ardern went on maternity leave, we heard what a splendid job he did running the Labour New Zealand First government.
Well, she's not going to go to. Labour's
past-
not going to go to war with someone they put in as acting prime minister because their own leader is on maternity leave, are they?
They seem perfectly happy with him, and people who tend to lean to the left were very
Yeah,
pleased.
but that was
and
before he started.
complimented him.
Yes,
That
he's
was
got
before
more
he started
extreme
going
over
crazy.
time.
If,
Mark.
uh,
You think he's got
Comrades,
more?
we-
You think he's more extreme than he was when he went to Howick and talked about Showick
Yeah, well,
and McMansions? I'm not sure he's any more extreme.
He's more dangerous. He's
mellow.
more dangerous.
Comrades,
Put
we
that way.
need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is the broken privatisation experiment pouring 70 million litres of shit per day into Wellington Harbour. Dita, Wellington is not drowning in sewage by accident. This is the predictable outcome of decades of privatisation ideology, lowest bid contracting, and political cowardice. Thoughts?
Yes. What's the question?
Follow-up question. Viola's record of operational failure is blisteringly incompetent. Sweet Jesus. What exactly have we got for the money spent here? Because it looks like a foreign company milking monopoly rentals while degrading the investment.
And this is exactly the problem with what we keep hearing about recycled assets and private-public partnerships and blah, blah, blah. It's just an expensive loan from offshore. That's what it is.
It's the same Viola's same company that trashed public transport in Auckland for years.
Yes,
too.
exactly.
Simon, how is Three Waters looking now? How's it looking? How's it looking? How's it?
Three Waters is looking.
looking?
The Three Waters is looking the way it always looked, like a sensible idea that
Right?
got terribly
Yes.
badly sold by the politicians who were behind it.
Yes.
But can I say something else
Please.
about the sewage crisis in Wellington, how extraordinary it is? There is a narrative out there now that the Greens are to blame. The
What?
Greens are to blame because Tamitha Paul, as a city councillor in Wellington, put a motion when they were discussing their previous long-term plan back a few years ago when Andy Foster was mayor.
Yeah.
To fund cycleways. And
Oh my
that
God.
council
Oh my.
voted for
Everything
cycleways.
comes back to cycleways.
It's amazing. That council voted for cycleways, but it did not vote the money that was proposed in the budget for sewage. So the two things have been linked. This is just an absurd
Follow-up
idea.
question,
Of
follow-up
course, I
question.
just want to say,
Yeah,
of course,
yeah,
the
yeah.
council
Yeah.
should have funded sewage properly. It
Right.
does not mean that other things in the budget should not have happened.
Follow-up question. All that dark ag money funneled through the Taxpayers Union stable of clients convinced Kiwis that Damaris was stealing the water, and now large amounts of the coastline are toxic because of the huge rainfall we had overflowing our crumbling water infrastructure. We made the sewage-encrusted bed. Shouldn't we all be forced to sleep in it? Shouldn't we? Isn't this our due desserts?
You know the theory that the worse things get, the more people adjust their idea of what's normal, so they never really realise how things are getting worse. This is the consequence, as Dita said, of underfunding core services. This is the consequence of low rates that do not keep up with infrastructure, and yet the people on that council who say, no, we wanted to fund the sewage, they are the people who've led the drive for inadequate rates revenue in Wellington for years and years and years.
Matthew, this shit-encrusted fiasco has been enabled by poorly managed privatisation contracts that have hollowed out institutionalised knowledge in favour of the cheapest management cost. Where are your free market gods now?
I think what's happened is a succession of decades now, since 2008, where New Zealanders, as the British High Commissioner once put it, want European levels of spending and infrastructure, and they want to pay American levels of tax. and we just, Three Waters and the new Three Waters was actually about one thing. It was about lowering the interest rate that would have to be paid in order to redevelop the water infrastructure.
Pretty much.
That's the only thing that matters. And in the end, it was Milton Friedman and Roger Kerr from the Business Roundtable who said, look, the only true tax cut is a spending cut. And so under that, this government and they didn't cut taxes. They just deferred taxes with the moves they made in their first 100 days. And in the end, as you said about private-public partnerships, I agree largely with that critique. In the end, if you want a functioning sewage network, you have to pay for it. And you have to pay for it either through higher taxes now or in the future, I mean, borrowing, or you have to do it through cutting some of the unnecessary government spending. But people have to be very clear that is not cycleways. I mean, obviously, the Tertiary Education Commission and MB and things like that should be abolished, but it's not to save money. I mean, one of the bad things about the Taxpayers Union, I mean, it does good work highlighting some waste, but I think it sends a message to people that if you just abolished MB or the Ministry of Pacific Affairs, we wouldn't have a permanent locked-in fiscal deficit that's going to send us bankrupt very, very soon. And the fact is we either have to pay more taxes or levies, as the Prime Minister tried to call them yesterday,
levies now,
or we have to cut the welfare state, and in reality we have to do both. And it doesn't really matter how this election ends up. We're going to do both those things over the next decade because we are living as if we're a first world country, but we're not.
Follow-up question. Critics point to National's replacement for Three Waters as more of the exact same management structure that helped cause what we're seeing in Wellington right now. Does the government care, or is bashing co-governance more important for National?
I don't see much difference between Three Waters and the government's proposal, except for the co-governance committee that was going to appoint the board members of the new entities who would then be required to operate in the best interests, not of iwi, but of the company. So, as I said, and Simon said, it was shockingly sold by the previous government. They refused to argue on the basic economic grounds that we needed to get amalgamation in order to achieve lower interest rates for the necessary borrowing, and they tried to turn it into safe water and dealing with the legitimate treaty water issue, which that should have always been kept separate from the issue of the pipes and how to build better ones.
I was just going to say, I think there's something else. Matthew was talking about the problem with the messaging of the Taxpayers Union. I think there's another core message that they subscribe to, that they deliberately produce, and many others sign up to it, and that is that if we cut our revenue, that will force governments, council, local and national, central, to spend on the things where the money really needs to be spent. It is a false premise. It's not what happens, because governments at local and central level, faced with not enough revenue to spend on what they know they need to spend, cut a bit of everything. Yeah. They cut it all around.
And they do baubles. They still do the baubles.
Oh, they still do. Well, you can call it baubles, but what happens is they don't go, we must fully fund the sewage and we must fully fund the roads.
You would think that the Taxpayers Union, being rightly sceptical of politicians, understanding they are loathsome individuals in general, who don't wish what's good for New Zealand, they seem to have a remarkable belief that they would respond to lower revenue by lower spending, and they don't. They just borrow more. And so I think the Taxpayers Union should be less naive about the integrity of politicians than they seem to be.
And ignored. Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is the new gas levy for an LPG gas facility that critics argue is a dirty, dumb and expensive decision that will leave New Zealanders subsidising more climate pollution through higher electricity bills. On the climate change issue, Matthew wrote a brutal analysis of our climate change reality in the Herald last week, where he pointed out the glaringly obvious. New Zealand will miss our Paris emissions agreements, and we will be fined anywhere between $3 billion and $24 billion, a price that no government could realistically pay when the domestic economy is as damaged as it is. Simon, 1, why are we blowing $1 billion on a liquid natural gas import terminal? And 2, no government will ever pay the Paris Agreement penalties, will they?
Which is something that Matthew has always argued. I just want to take a slight issue with Matthew, and I hope you won't mind my saying this, that the idea that Matthew's the only one speaking the truth about climate change. Matthew has argued for decades
Oh, thank you, Simon.
It's not important. We can't do anything about it. We
Yeah.
shouldn't do anything about it. Somebody else, some other way, it'll be, and blah, blah, blah. All the arguments that have put off effective action.
That's not the
I think
argument
it's
I've made.
But no one's
however,
paying the. No
I've
one's
always
paying
believed
the
this.
$3
I've
we
always
also-
believed the issue here is ag science, but it's always been about ag science.
Could we also remember that liquefied natural gas is methane?
Yes.
Is
Yes,
methane.
that's
It is
right.
one of the most dangerous greenhouse gases.
24 times more worse than
Oh, I think it's
CO2.
and could do
Right.
more than that.
Although
yeah.
short lasting.
Short lasting,
Eight
yeah,
years,
but
8 years,
short
8
lasting,
years,
short
8
lasting
years.
means nothing if we keep pumping more and more
That's
of it
right.
into
That's
the
right.
atmosphere.
That's right. That's right.
No, but once you stop, you'll get a better effect.
Yeah, but by
than
then
you
the
would with
polar
carbon.
ice caps are melting. You're just drowning, aren't you?
This new proposal, where the money could be spent
Yes.
on renewables, could be spent. If you fly into Auckland, you fly into
Nuclear?
Wellington, no, not nuclear. You look
Well,
at
it
all
could be.
those roofs waiting for solar.
Yeah, I
And
know.
And the answer that Luxon and Simon Watts, the minister, have both been giving is, yeah, but what do you do at night? It's called batteries, you guys. It's called batteries. The technology is there. It is super
Right.
cheap now. It is super efficient.
Yes.
And there is no serious attempt yet, despite the window dressing,
Yep.
for it to be rolled out here.
Preach. Matthew, you are one of the few right-wingers who acknowledge that climate change is actually happening. You argue for climate adaptation and coastal retreat. Why?
Well, I always have. I mean, this is an issue for the world. It's caused historically by the United States and Europe.
And
Primarily, they are now the good guys. I mean, at least the US is roughly stable. Europe is the good guys as it's moved to services, although
How
that
stable is America? How stable is
exporting
America?
You mean
They're-
emissions
they're-
are stable?
emissions. They've gone up about 4% since the Rio summit of 1990. But it's always been an issue about China and India. And that's the beginning and the end of the issue. And I've always known that, and everybody has always known that. And it has made sense for New Zealand to do sort of virtue signalling diplomatically and go along with all these things. But it's never been true that anything we did would ever
Where's my
matter.
case?
So that's fine. And the thing that New Zealand could have done, and I think Helen Clark probably got the policy right at the beginning, was have some massive science fund, inspire the nation like Kennedy did with landing a person on the moon. And 14% of the world's emissions are methane. And we have the best agricultural scientists, and we should have looked at this as a global problem and just said no to all the bullshit at Kyoto and bloody Paris and wherever else, and said what our country's going to do is it's going to solve that 14% problem through Massey University and our fantastic dairy and agricultural scientists. We didn't do that because someone did a tractor up the steps of Parliament, so we decided not to do that. And I think
His
also
name?
in the Shane Ardern, and there was
That's
also a view that there was a national MP, and there was also not a very successful national MP. I think there was also a view, New Zealand has this complete bullshit idea we lead the world and people care. I heard it in trade. We used to hear it in the 80s and 90s about economic reform, that the whole world was watching Roger Douglas and Ruth Richardson, and none of this. This is all complete nonsense. We used to hear it with anti-nuclear nonsense. But I think there was strain in our politics that we wanted to believe that the world really cared, that we were leading the world on meeting Kyoto targets, and it was pointless and stupid.
Dita, isn't there an insane disconnect between the catastrophic climate change we are seeing and government policy that seems hell-bent on erasing any meaningful environmental policies?
I mean, yes, there is. But the problem with this government, I feel, in this particular area is, first of all, they naturally genuflect to the US no matter what the US does. And they are banking on Trumpism being around for a long time, in that the US administration, while it still has power and de-dollarisation hasn't happened and so forth, is going to start demanding that other countries and blocs take on the same kind of environmental laws that they do. So that's the first thing they bank on. Second thing is the imagination piece. They have none. And I think Matthew said it right, that we should have looked at agricultural science, but it's more than that. New Zealand could actually lead the pack in, and it would take a very big leap of imagination, but it's actually the consumption of meat that is another huge problem, and the consumption of dairy, looking at alternatives, all these things. We could have really, gradually moved our people onto a world-leading industry, but we just lack the imagination.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Dita, your final word this week, please.
I'm really horrified to see the protests in Sydney and Melbourne and so forth.
Oh, Jesus, weren't they violent?
They're so violent, and I think actually it seems as though police forces all around the world go and learn in Tel Aviv how to keep people down, because those are the tactics they're using, and it's very, very sad.
Awful. Simon, your final word, please.
I just want to have another round on climate change. I'm sorry, and I agree completely with Dita, what she just said about what's just happened in Sydney. It is true New Zealand has a very minor track record in terms of emissions overall, but per capita we are one of the worst countries in the world historically. We have an historic responsibility, and it is particularly acute in relation to our neighbours in the Pacific. And if you think of us not as a country, but as cities, as individuals, as suburbs, as people who can make a difference and companies that can make a difference, New Zealand's about the same size as Los Angeles. We wouldn't for a moment say Los Angeles shouldn't shoulder its responsibilities to lower emissions, so why should we?
Matthew, your final word, please, this week.
Well, there's a dispute about this India Free Trade Agreement, and it's very unfortunate because in the past there has been bipartisan work between Labor and National on trade, and they've kept one another informed. And 30 long years ago, showing how old I am, I worked for a National Party Trade Minister, Lockwood Smith, who now Sir Lockwood, and he would have the Labor Party trade spokesperson over for drinks. I was going to say every week, but that would be an exaggeration. But, probably twice a month, something like that. And Mike Moore would chain smoke in his office, despite Dr. Smith being a health fanatic. But anyway, and the national government then knew at the time that it shouldn't do. When Dr. Smith was negotiating abroad, he knew that he shouldn't say things about New Zealand's position unless he knew that the Labour Party roughly supported it. And that convention, I believe, continued for a while, but it seems to have completely broken down. And so the national government went ahead, negotiated it's a reasonable deal. I mean, India's a free trade recalcitrant. It's an okay deal, but they don't have parliamentary support. And I'm just surprised that Todd McClay wasn't having a weekly or fortnightly beer with Damien O'Connor from Labor, because that could have solved this current fuss we're seeing over this diplomatic issue.
Trumpism.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, none of us will be happy to see the Christchurch white supremacist terrorist attempting to relitigate and appeal his conviction in Wellington this week. Many of us will be disgusted that he gets to waste one more second of our time and resource for his murderous atrocity committed upon an innocent Muslim population. In terms of his actual argument, he is claiming he was so out of it and that the prison conditions were so torturous that he wasn't in the right mind when he pleaded guilty and showed remorse, which feels like an enormous stretch. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing when he made a white supremacy signal in court during his first appearance, and the argument to his mental well-being will be a tightrope to walk, because butchering 51 people in cold blood is not a rational act. He wants to claim he was rational in his barbarism and mutated thinking to justify his insane white supremacy theories, while pretending he was too irrational once taken into the custody to plead properly. Bullshit. The victims of his crime feel deeply upset and resentful that he is having this opportunity to challenge his sentence. But it is a process we must respect and we must see through, no matter the trauma and revulsion, for two reasons. The first reason is the magnitude of the punishment that was meted out. This racist scumbag will be in prison for life without parole. That is a punishment that is unique and must allow all legal avenues to be reasonably exhausted in challenging and defending that punishment. The second reason is because we as a people are far better than him and his hate. His hope was to create a backlash for Muslims to start warring with the domestic cultures they lived in. Instead, he was shown mercy and given legal protections and rights because we are a liberal progressive democracy and we protect the innate intrinsic rights of the individual, no matter the abominations they wrought. In our mercy, in our respect for the law and the rights of the individual, do we denounce his act of hate and refuse to be provoked into mutilating ourselves the way he did in Christchurch? I know, given the scumbag legal rights grates with many who are rightfully disgusted by his violence, but it is in the refusal to lower our values that we ultimately beat abominations like him. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small weta in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.